You're listening to the Verdigris podcast with Rae and Andi. I'm Andi.
And I'm Rae.
And we have a website. It's verdigrispodcast.org. We are also on Instagram and on Facebook. And we also have merch. So if you'd like to get any of the little extras or the merch, please check out verdigrispodcast.org. You're listening to the Verdigris podcast with Rae and Andi. I'm Andi.
And I'm Rae.
And today we have a special guest to talk about our topic, Jeffrey Harris. Free, it's lovely to have you.
Thank you so much for coming and talking with us today.
Thank you for inviting me to have a conversation with you all.
So for those listeners who have been listening for a while, you should know that last year, I think it was our second episode.
I thought it was our first. I guess we did have a little intro.
We had an intro.
Yeah.
So
All right.
our first real episode was about lesbian bars, and we had a guest for that episode as well, who's an alum of our program, Cosette Vidershave, and you should check out that episode if you get a chance. And so for this June, we thought we would talk about another part of the LGBTQ plus community by talking about gay men and their impact on preservation and the development of preservation in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Hence, we invited our friend Free to come and talk with us because he is a historian and a historic preservation consultant, and he specializes in all of these things like diverse historic places and African American and LGBTQ and music and military and sport related places, which sounds super cool.
So Free, would you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So my name is Jeffrey A. Harris. I'm known in the preservation world by my nickname of Free, and I'm a Hampton, Virginia-based historian and historic preservation consultant, as has been said. In a past life, I was the first director for diversity at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I also was the program coordinator for its African American Historic Places Initiative, which amazingly was more than 20 years ago that's happened. So anyone who is now familiar with the African American Heritage Fund, they're the sort of foundations for that wonderful program goes back those 2 decades to that National Trust Initiative. And, you know, I'm very proud of the work that I was able to achieve during my tenure with the National Trust. So that's me. For the most part, what I've focused on primarily is I've really served as a consulting historian on various projects. You know, I worked with Mary Ruffin Hanbury, who is also a National Trust alum, on National Register nominations of 2 African American historic places in Raleigh, North Carolina. I worked with the city of Raleigh also on its LGBTQ historic context study. So I participated in the first phase. They've gone on to a second phase, and they have completed that second phase of work and have presented their findings to the residents of Raleigh. I also served as a consulting historian with a Rochester, New York-based architecture firm that did an architectural survey of the city's first African-American architect, a gentleman called Thomas W. Boyd Jr., who was the first Black graduate of Syracuse University's School of Architecture back in 1928. And he had an illustrious career, sort of mid-century, you know, that goes all, you know, this, I jokingly referred to him in some ways as sort of a Forrest Gumpian figure with regard to African-American architects. They're really well known. And, you know, he somehow managed to work with a good number of them, you know, in his career, which is really amazing. And he really, what's so fascinating about him is he really helped to transform sort of the suburban communities around Rochester, which one wouldn't necessarily think of for an African American architect, but he did in fact do that among, you know, other things. So, you know, the work that I've been able to do has been fascinating. You know, I participated in the National Park Service's LGBTQ heritage theme study. I contributed the chapter on African American LGBTQ historic places, and unfortunately, as many people may now know, that theme study, all 1,500 plus pages of it, have been removed from the National Park Service's website. Fortunately, a number of other LGBTQ history and preservation focused outlets reached out to the various authors for their permission to sort of copy and paste, the various chapters so that they do linger out in the internet ether. So they're not fully disappeared, but in terms of the Park Service, that information is no longer available to the general public. And it's, again, 1,500 pages of comprehensive first time in US history, a federally funded study of LGBTQ historic places from every angle one could imagine that you could do. So that's a sort of snapshot of my work. I also am still and soon to not be, the board chair of the Rainbow Heritage Network, which is a national organization that advocates for the preservation of LGBTQIA plus historic places. And again, like I said, soon not to be. I've been the chair for a very long time, and a brother's getting up there, and I'm needing to shift, a little bit. So I'm doing some planning with some younger people who can take that on and hopefully do amazing things in challenging times. So
yeah, then you get to be a mentor and watch them storm the barricades. I think that's
I would love to.
So this time period is definitely not the most cheerful. It's
Yeah.
been something that we've talked about, obviously, that historic sites are losing a great deal of really important interpretation at a time that feels, yeah, I have nothing polite to say.
Right. Well, what I was going to say is that we all need to think about it's not losing it, right? That maybe it is being pushed aside for the moment, but our job is to make sure it's not lost. And
Right.
That being said, you are right. I wanted to ask you about that, about, sort of the theme study going away, because I noticed yesterday as I was trying to find your chapter that it was gone as I expected it to be. And I was able to find it in other places, but we will also have the full PDF on our verdigrispodcast.org website, because I want to make sure that we are playing our part to link and get the information still out there. We all have to keep telling these stories. They can't suppress all of us, right? We have to keep talking.
I think the thing that I was reminded of, and my concern has been growing since around 2010, to be fair.
Okay.
I've often spoke of, and this is fully my historian hat on, I've often spoke of my concern that we were looking down the barrel of a neo-redeemer period. So for those who aren't aware, Reconstruction ends, around 1877. Newly freed and former enslaved Africans making advances, doing what they needed to do in this, this new category, throughout the South. And with the election of 1876 and its conclusion, one of the choices made was to have the military leave the South. Those folks were protecting those newly freed African Americans and allowed the white Southerners to regain in the South. And they billed it as a redemption. They were going to redeem the South from the scourge of, Republican rule, from the scourge of Black rule, all of these things. And as we now know, the rise of Jim Crow comes from that era. The rise of the Klan comes from that era and all that good stuff. So my concern all the way back to 2010, with the first midterm following the election of our first African-American president, was what on earth is the backlash going to look like? And what form is it going to take? I thought initially, I was like, okay, Tea Party rise. I see what I see. That's interesting. I was wrong. I was absolutely wrong that was it, because that was not it.
Yeah.
It kept going. And it has felt now as though we're looking almost like at a 2004 tsunami effect in terms of that neo-redemption.
Yeah.
I mean, we're now to a point, in my estimation, where you have a group of people who would rather tear everything down rather than share power, rather than be the multiracial, multicultural democracy that we could be, sort of our, think Star Trek,
Yeah, yeah.
I want a Star Trek, I want a Star Trekian, future.
Don't
And,
we all?
that's the hope,
Give me Sir Patrick Stewart. Absolutely.
Right. Maybe there's some green dude out there, it's like, that's for me, I don't know, who knows? That's sort of the historical context that I often think that we're in. We're in a very potentially dangerous neo-redemption era in our history right now.
And in that context, I think it's very easy to become really depressed and feel that you're powerless. I know I've felt that quite a bit. And I try to remind myself that, this too shall pass and that the pendulum does swing. And I also try to remind myself that this is the service that we provide as preservationists and educators, that if nothing else, we can show like those hints and those tools in the built environment that point to that historic precedent. And maybe I'm overselling it a little bit, but I'm trying to find that glimmer of hope. And I don't know, Free, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, again, going back to history, look at what African Americans were able to do during that time. You have the rise of the historically Black colleges and universities. You have all of these amazing events still happening. People are still doing things, even in the face of horrific setbacks in terms of civil rights and civil liberties. The rise of lynching and, all these things are happening, but you still have African Americans making history, recording history, doing what they need to do, even if it involved moving, moving away from the South, things were still happening. And I think that's thinking back to what those ancestors were able to do in the face of that level of danger, that we've never experienced that in the current state, and I hope we don't. But that they were able to do so many amazing things in the face of genuine, literally life-threatening situations. That gives me hope that, hey, we're further along than that. All we really need to do is follow that example and keep that information alive. The beauty of the internet is that it's still available to everybody, to put out content, to talk about things. We haven't reached a point where you're not allowed to talk about African American LGBTQ. The federal government may be discouraging, the idea of the contributions of non-white, non-straight, non-Christian people. But the rest of us don't have to follow that if we don't want to.
Yeah.
The history is still there. I don't care how much you try to prevent people from finding it. It still exists. The places still exist. And even if you tore everything down, somebody's going to know the history of said place and still be able to talk about it. And someone has written it down. So, I really do try to remain hopeful, which I know for some might seem, oh, that's pie in the sky. I don't understand. These people are always hopeful. And I'm like, so I got to be hopeful, because otherwise I'd be crying in the corner. So I'd rather not cry in the corner. So.
Well, let's talk about some of that history that we want to make sure doesn't disappear. So first of all, we wanted to talk about the role of gay men in the history of historic preservation. And when Andi and I were talking about it, we were saying like there's kind of this almost like romanticization or mythology about this idea that that there's a lot of actually gay men and then older sort of women, right, who formed the preservation movement. So first, we wanted to talk about that, like, where does this sort of stereotype or mythology come from, and what does it mean for who gets involved in preservation in general?
So, I have to really think about that, because it is such an interesting question. Again, now, remember, I came from the academic history world into the realm of historic preservation. So when I arrived as an intern at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, I had no idea the number of gay men that I would encounter. And I had no idea the number of women that I would encounter. So I really did walk into a circumstance that I was not necessarily prepared to to understand. I was surprised. I was as surprised, I think, as anybody who would, find themselves suddenly in this new world. And the conclusion that I at least came to, historic preservation, I think, gives opportunities to individuals who may not feel as though, or not necessarily have been allowed to advance in other professional realms. And because it is seen in some ways from an aesthetic lens rather than a necessarily professional lens, that sort of blindness from those on the outside has allowed women and gay men, in particular, to flourish within a specific field of work, I think.
Okay.
That's the impression that I've got. So, it's some older gay man from the mid 20th century who fawns over the beauty of an architectural building, and it speaks to them, and all those good things.
Yeah.
Or ladies who, like, the ladies who wanted to save George Washington's home, as well as the ladies who wanted to save Frederick Douglass's home, within a parallel efforts, that they moved into that realm. And I think that a lot of those ladies were able to find guys who could help them, because again, if you look at those earliest periods, women still didn't have the right to vote.
Right. Yeah.
They had the right to vote, so they needed male proxies to move about the society at that time. And I think that a willingness for those, for lack of better, for gay men, for gay bi men, there seemed to be at least a sense of, we're not going to be judged negatively by this particular cohort of people, so we can actually work together to fulfill this particular need, to meet this need. That's my Jeffrey Harris interpretation as to
that's what we
women
want.
and gay and bi men and women generally have been able to have gravitated toward historic preservation, but also have been able to thrive within the realm of it.
Right. I think it's given agency to people, either, women who have otherwise been kept in the private sphere, again, historically, not anymore, but hopefully not anymore. And gay men who were also pushed out of some of those spheres of decision making to get that sense of, hey, we're doing something worthwhile and something that's seen as being positively American, right? Of developing that American ethos of preserving our history. And maybe I'm reading too deep into it, but I do think that it's been a way in which underrepresented groups have gotten the chance to do something meaningful.
Right. Yeah, there's certainly that. I think now, as you look at the realm of preservation and you start moving into the conversations about various tax credits and real estate realms, and then at least I've found, anecdotally, suddenly straight dudes start showing up, because now you've moved into this more interesting and or competitive space with sort of classic real estate development. So then those characters are having to learn how to engage with women and non-straight men in positions of actual power that they need to achieve what their goals are. And I found that fascinating to witness over the years. I've been really fascinated to see that, because what it has done and what it continues to have the potential of doing is helping a cohort of people learn how to adapt to the non-traditional power brokers that exist for them to achieve an end. And by virtue of that, those characters learn that, hey, you actually have some power. We can work with you on this. Maybe we can do other things. And shockingly, that sort of falls within the realm of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. It's fascinating how these sorts of things come together.
Yeah, I will say, on a lighter note too, it's really fun to watch straight cis men having to code switch. It's
Hey,
time.
it's necessary, and they do it. you know what, let's be fair. They do it themselves. They wouldn't necessarily call it that. And I say this as an alumnus of a men's college. Trust me, there's code switching that exists within a male space, period. You just have it, you do. But, you know, they may not necessarily, they wouldn't, I don't know if a lot of them would cop to the idea that it's code switching. They might bristle at the term, but it's what's done nonetheless.
So historically, gay men tended to be dinks. So this is a term that we use in urban planning. So for listeners who don't know what a dink is, it stands for dual income, no kids. So it doesn't necessarily mean a gay couple by any means. It means just any couple that has two incomes and no children, which means that they presumably have disposable income, which means they can presumably spend money on things like hobbies.
Fixing up a house.
And fixing up a house, exactly. So for this, it seems like this is a very, socioeconomic category. But also, I'm not sure that that socioeconomic category still holds because I know plenty of gay male couples who have children now. So, do you think that this is relevant? Do you think that it's an interesting thing to think about, or has that time gone?
I'm beginning to think that that is more within the realm of that sort of history of gay men moving into urban spaces and just for my own sense of feeling better about being clear on something. I know that there are those out there when they have a conversation about gentrification, which is where this can lead, that the mental construct is of white gay dudes coming into presumably Black or brown neighborhoods, you know, fixing things up, praying that the people who exist there right now will eventually be priced out so that their home values can go up and blah, 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 all of those things. Before we get that far, there were a number of Black and brown gay men and or couples and lesbian who were Black and brown couples who actually already existed within a lot of those historic neighborhoods. But interestingly, when one talks about the gays arriving, those literal original gays who were already in place aren't talked about.
Yeah.
And a part of a criticism that I recall giving back in the mid-aughts was I did chastise people about the idea of general neighborliness. Folks could have connected on the level of sexuality. The new gays coming in who were white could have connected with the existing, Black and brown gays who were there to help navigate, community neighborhood dynamics. And it seems in far too many cases that was not done. The Black and brown gays were put into the category of Black and brown, and their sexual orientation was ignored. And then vice versa. The Black and brown communities looked at the white gays as white. Add to that the resentment that Black and brown gays may have had for the white gays for not dealing with, hey, you got potential natural allies here that you're just dismissing because of the way we look. So I think that those were some of the sort of unfortunate and sadly they became nasty dynamics that I think prevented the prospect of a good potential working relationship for the broader realm of historic preservation that really could have benefited a lot, because even those who came in who had money could have given really solid, interesting advice to the not as wealthy existing gays of color to help them, they could have gone together as teams to navigate City Hall and, planning boards and things like that. But going all the way back to the idea of dinks, I think that that's going to be moving into a realm of a part of our history of neighborhood change rather than sort of a current bit. Yes, there are going to be dinks that exist out there because that's the case. But at least in the gay realm, there are lots of, younger gays who really are wanting to create families, and they're going to be concerned about schools. They're going to be concerned about all the things that, the straight folks are worried about in certain areas. They're probably doing their suburban shopping now. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it actually leads into sort of a direction that we want to take it, which is talking about kind of more of an urban planning lens. So not just individual houses, but talking about neighborhoods, and specifically talking about gay neighborhoods, or something that planners, because planners love new terminology, and I love portmanteaus, which are words that squish two words together and make a new one. So this is an awesome one, gayborhoods. So we wanted to talk about this idea of, which may or may not be historical. And I guess that's actually what we want to get into. Like, is this something that's still the case, or are gayborhoods something that we don't really do anymore? So we probably have to talk a little bit about what we mean.
Right. So I can give a little bit of background on this. In urban planning, the idea of the gay population having a kind of impact on housing values is relatively old. Uh, well,
Hey, I'm relatively
within the context. The oldest gay index that I was able to find is from the 1990s. And yes, it is called the Gay Index.
Yep.
And the idea here was that the more gay people you have in your neighborhood, the higher your housing values are. I mean, it's basically that simple, right? That having a gay population equals better living experience, and therefore more people, and therefore more demand. This idea was really popularized by a scholar named Richard Florida, who is very well known in the planning sphere, and he
Rise of the creative class.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so he worked from that creative class concept to what he called the Bohemian Gay Index, which he developed and I think published in 2008. We'll have, links to all of this on the website. But the idea is that having a gay population in a neighborhood indicates that, number one, it's going to be more aesthetically pleasing. Make of that as you will. That's his theory. Okay, that's not mine. And so that's from the supply side, right? That the building blocks, if you will, of the neighborhood are going to look nicer, and so therefore more people are going to want to live there. And from the demand side, what he's arguing is that those neighborhoods telegraph a more welcoming, more inclusive environment, and therefore are going to attract more people because they're going to feel more welcome. And so, in other words, better supply, better demand, and that's going to lead to better housing values. Although there's been tons of critique of this concept over the years, and in particular, whether gays can be grouped like that, like, is that okay? And I think there's a lot to say about this, right? The LGBTQ plus community, I would argue, is many communities kind of overlapping each other. And of course, this does not look at race at all, which is deeply problematic.
Absolutely.
And so finally, I think it leads to the accusation that Free you already hit on, which is that it leads to gentrification. And again, portmanteau, which they called gaytrification, which, right? I don't love it, right? The idea that basically once gay men come into a neighborhood, that it's going to lead to, in the long term, the expulsion of lower income and in particular Black and brown people. And I think there's a lot of
Including the gay, Black, and brown people.
Absolutely.
Because again, just right off the top, I'm like, well, again, I remember LaDroit Park having a number of Black gays. So LaDroit Park is an historic African American neighborhood in Washington, D.C. at the sort of foot of Howard University. Anyway, lots of Black
Rae used to live for 18 years and did her PhD research.
Exactly. So Rae, please talk to us a little bit about the gayborhood in LaDroit Park.
Well, actually, I think Free probably knows more about it than I do. But yeah, so LaDroit Park, just kind of encapsulating really interesting history in just a nutshell. It was started actually as a gated white community at the foot of Howard University, and it had literal gates, so that was not a 20th century thing. It was in the 1870s, and it was land that was actually bought from Howard and redeveloped and then made exclusive and intentionally off of the DC grid so that it felt like like you were, in another place and nobody was allowed to walk on the streets. And there were several protests. No, it's true. And there were several protests. So they finally actually tore down the gates. It became an integrated community for about a generation. And then it became a very exclusive African-American enclave. And by exclusive, I mean people with lots of power, but not necessarily also lots of money. So there's lots of different housing options within LaJoy Park, and it's a very eclectic community in terms of socioeconomic status, but had, because of its proximity to Howard University and because of Jim Crow laws that we mentioned earlier, it became a place that attracted lots of people who did all kinds of amazing things. And then in the 20th century, it also had a thriving gay community because I think of, its university connections, its arts connections, all of those things. How did I do?
I could have said it better myself.
Question for you, is the LaJoy Park gayborhood a African-American gayborhood or an integrated or a white gayborhood?
That's a great question.
LaJoy Park that I remember. Now, again, I've been in Hampton, Virginia since 2010. So I don't know LaJoy as it is right at this moment. But during my time in Washington, LaJoy Park was a fairly integrated neighborhood that had a growing number of whites moving into it. And by integrated, I mean LGBTQ, primarily African-American folks, with straight African-American folks, with new people moving in to the community. And, you had the Mary Church Terrell House, the half that survives, from the former duplex. The Anna Julia Cooper House is within the, is there. The Lucy Diggs Slow Hall dormitory for Howard is there. Lucy Diggs Slow, lesbian, who she and her partner lived in Brookland. Interestingly enough, she's also one of the founders of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. So, you have, I think I would say, integrated at that time. I vividly remember going to a couple of house parties with a wide variety of kind of the society you kind of want to see. Everybody was there, having a good time, being comfortable. But you did start to see some elements of tension with sadly, newer white gay men coming in and beginning complaints about noise or beginning complaints about things where it's like you're not looking at the neighborhood that you've moved into as a neighborhood that you want to become a part of. It seemed as though, I'm stressing, it seemed as though you're moving into a neighborhood because it had this fabulous housing stock and that you possibly would be able to maximize the housing stock, get your value in the home. Maybe the home values wouldn't indeed go up, as Richard Florida talked about, and you could make a wonderful return on your investment. But a part of, getting that return on investment would be looking around your neighbors and going, we don't know if you necessarily need to be here for us to get that return on investment. So maybe, if we do certain things by virtue of fixing our things up and calling on the city to begin the process of saying these things need to be kept up, then maybe we could do this. So it's beautifully complex. It reminds me of all the reasons that I love history. There's not a straightforward narrative. That some villains are actually heroes in some respects, and some heroes are a little bit villainous.
Yeah, I was just in Chicago in October with my sister, and we went to North Halsted, which in my mind is Boys Town, right? And we had a great time. We went to a drag brunch. It was lovely. It was her 40th birthday. Hi, my little sister, I love you. And it was wonderful. We had a great time. There were great murals all over the neighborhood. And then in preparation for this podcast episode, I read up a little bit on Boys Town because it's one of the neighborhoods I'm familiar with. And all of the subtext and all of the conflict about the very name of Boys Town is stuff that went right over my head while I was there, right? I was totally unaware that Boys Town was established by the city officially, basically as a neighborhood in the 90s, in the late 90s, which at the time was really forward thinking and I would argue a great step forward, but it had deeply racial undertones that I'm not a Chicagoland native. I don't know all that stuff, right? But it was deeply, deeply racialized, right? That neighborhood is a white neighborhood. It is very far away from the South Chicago Black areas. Because of the name Boys Town, which was given from the outside, not from the inside, it's a very, gay men only, and not all of the other groups within the LGBTQ plus community, making people, especially trans people, feel really, really left out in the cold. So it's something that is still a fraught issue today. And even though the name has officially changed, the reality is, in my mind, it's still Boys Town.
Yeah.
Um,
I just said it, too, because it's moved into an historical realm. That is an historic term for that community, even in the midst of its change. It can become all straight in 5 years, and people are still going to call it Boys Town. When I lived in DC, my last neighborhood was Logan Circle,
Good.
which
That was
also on our list.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about DuPont Circle, Logan Circle, that whole transition. So yeah.
I lived in Logan Circle for, oh good grief, from 2005 to 2010. So I was there for 5 years. I followed my cousin who moved there in 1997. It was perfect because my office, the headquarters of the National Trust, is in DuPont Circle, literally like 4 blocks, 5 blocks away. So I lived in the part of Logan Circle that was sort of literally in between Logan and DuPont circles, the physical circles, closer to the Logan side. I know when my cousin moved there, he would have been, well, not a dink because he wasn't dual, he's single, he was a sink, I guess. But I remember when he was looking for a place to move, he called me. I was in graduate school at the time. He called me and said, hey, there's this really beautiful house that I want you to see. They're turning it into condos. I'm like, okay, great. We'll meet up. And it turned out that it was the Grant Mansion. That's right. That's on Logan Circle between Vermont Avenue and Rhode Island Avenue.
Do you want to describe it really quickly, Free?
It's what is that? I'm bad with architectural terms. Is
it Second Empire?
Is it Second Empire?
Oh, heck yes.
Yeah. It's a Second Empire home that used to belong to the son of Ulysses Grant. And they converted it into 2, 4, 6, 8 condos right there on the circle. And my cousin ultimately did purchase one of them. His condo faces Logan Circle, and the side of the condo is Rhode Island Avenue. It's a beautiful, beautiful
I'm
place.
assuming like a mansard roof kind of thing. And
yes, but
we're going to Google it. And
so his condo is not the base, it's the sort of first floor if you're looking at the building. So there's a basement, there are 2 basement condos. Then the first floor, second and third.
Oh, heck yes. Okay, let me just describe this. It looks a lot like all Second Empire houses. It's got a gorgeous mansard roof, actually a triple mansard roof line, and it's got bay windows and 2 front doors. So I wonder, is that retrofit? That seems like it would have been built that way.
I think it was built that way.
And so think of like, this is going to sound negative, but I promise it's not. Think of the Psycho House and then multiply it by 2. Well, it's that style.
That's actually a good descriptor.
That Second Empire style, or think of Edward Hopper paintings.
Yeah.
Right. And but it's beautiful. It's white. We'll have a picture of it on the website. So I'm assuming about 1860s, just gorgeous, gorgeous house with, heavy brackets and window hoods and large vertical windows.
When my cousin, said, hey, what do you think of this? Of course, I wasn't even in it. So I was still taking history courses. I was like, this is beautiful. You gotta be, of course, you definitely need to get this. Meanwhile, there really was still what's called a host roll. There were still prostitutes going up and down 13th Street, which is like a block and a half over. He was there when it was still, that was well before Whole Foods, well before any of the new developments came along P Street. It was an interesting place. But I recognize, as a history guy who liked architecture, I recognize the beauty of the building. And in my mind, I was like, oh, this is going to be worth something at some point. I don't know what you want to do with it. but it's going to be worth something. And he still owns it. But what was nice about it was that we also knew that the gays were beginning to move east from DuPont Circle because the neighborhood was going up in value. Straights were moving into the DuPont area. And if you know anything about Washington, D.C., and it's March of the Gays, they've gone east all the way to North Capitol Street and are slowly have crossed over to the other side, like into Eckington and some of those other neighborhoods. But there really was a steady march east going forth. And I chose to live there in '05, one, to be near my cousin and to be near work, but also I knew I was beginning to learn about African American LGBTQ folk who lived in both the U Street area, in the Logan Circle area. And I had this innate sense of I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted to kind of walk those same streets, as a Black gay man. I wanted, hey, who knows? Richard Bruce Nugent, from the Harlem Renaissance, the author of the first known gay literature publication, in the country. He walked these streets because he lived nearby. Or, Langston Hughes would roam around, some of these areas. He worked at the Wardman Park Hotel or the Wardman. So I wanted to be a part of that. That's just sort of a quirk of an historian who, kind of gets into these things. But by then I'd had the historic preservation book. I better understood the importance of place with regard to history. So it felt like a good motivator for me to move to a neighborhood where things happened and I could still see the places, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, the Mary McLeod Bethune house is right around the corner from there.
It is.
And, she is a towering figure in African American education. And, so that's a National Park Service site. We'll have a link to it. Yeah, so that whole neighborhood is certainly steeped in all kinds of layers of interesting history.
It's like the push and pull, right? Is that on the one hand, it's that pull of wanting to be part of history, wanting to be part of that the community, right, in a positive sense. And also, and I'm hoping that this second part is fading, is that sense that that space is just safer than most other spaces, right? Because I mean, that's why those enclaves were, developed in the first place, is because
Absolutely.
they were hidden in plain sight and in areas that were not very desirable at the time. Some of them quite dangerous, right? As you noted, originally were not the places that most people wanted to be, and then became these enclaves primarily for protection, right? And for being able to recognize each other in a way that would be not seen by the general public. This is something that I find really interesting because now cities market their neighborhoods.
Yep.
Historically, the neighborhoods were number one, tended to come out of existing, derelict areas, either because they were industrial areas like the meatpacking district in New York, or because they were already minority areas like the Marais in Paris, which historically was a Jewish ghetto. So areas that were, quote, undesirable to the larger population. And then those areas get nice, right? And have nightlife and activity and all that great stuff. So then it's more of a, hey, I want to be part of this, and less hopefully about I want to be safe. But once that neighborhood becomes, rainbows everywhere, I'm not opposed to rainbows. I adore rainbows, but I'm just saying, like, at what point is this just a marketing gimmick on the part of a city and no longer the actual identity of the neighborhood? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, when does it become just fake advertising as opposed to the culture of the area?
Interestingly, I think there's a hint of the answer in what we've seen happening with the abandonment of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs and support. So people were looking at it, I think there are lots of people who are looking at it capitalistically. This is a marketing tool for, getting people's money or somehow making it. And there is not a sense, so that when the tide turns, there was never real support for the communities themselves. It was just a way of getting into somebody's wallet, if you will. But before reaching that moment, and I think in some ways, again, I lived in Logan from '05 to 10. It was safe. It was an element of safety for me. A sense that one could be open. I think about the former bar, I think it's called Number 9 now, but it was called Halo at the time on P Street, directly across from the Whole Foods there between 14 and 15 in Northwest DC. And I want to say, and somebody will probably correct me, but I feel like it was one of the precious few bars in DC, gay bars in DC, that had full on, like, floor to ceiling windows where you could look in. You're walking down P Street, you could turn your head and you could look directly into this gay space. And if one were to do a survey, any folks out there from DC, in the gay realms knows phase one, the lesbian spot, absolutely not. I didn't know they had windows. If they did. Remington's, the country and western spot, I still don't remember if it had windows. Bachelor's Mill, a primarily Black men's space down in the barracks, down past Barracks Row on 8th. I'm not sure, I know that they had windows because it was a former brownstone, but I don't remember being able to look out onto 8th Street from any of those windows. I know the JRs had windows toward the front, but there is also a massive awning that basically covers you. I mean, if you're literally just walking, you're on a bus, you're not seeing inside that space. There was another spot where the gay spaces were on the second floor, not the first. You may have entered on the first, but you went up to do that. So, it's to have that type of space and to be able to see people just sitting on couches right by an open window, and to see couples, hand in hand, and watching, the little gay families, at the Whole Foods doing their thing, couples going to the studio theater, and then when they finish studio theater, you either go to Playbill or you went to Yum's to get your Chinese food. One of the things, any of the things that you could do, there was such a sense of comfort, I think, for a number of denizens of Logan's Circle that, again, DuPont was beginning to lose. Because I certainly remember a number of straight female friends who lived in DuPont, and they appreciated the safety of the gay men being within the mix. It did have that. I think all of those neighborhoods, if you talk to people who lived in them, they do have that sense. One thing I will say is that they all, that I can recall, did seem to lean very heavily toward men. For you to have greater interactions with lesbians, you'd have to go to Tacoma in Maryland, the Tacoma neighborhood in DC, or Tacoma Park in Maryland. That's where you saw a larger enclave of lesbians that I know of in here. As again, putting on my old director for diversity hat, I'm like, boy, there should be more women. What's going on? That doesn't make any sense. And I certainly had, I had my friends, bartenders and, servers, but I had to think about it. I was like, yeah, in terms of the lesbians that I knew, they did not live down here. They didn't live in that part of town. They lived elsewhere. Some off of Rhode Island Avenue, going just across the DC line, and the others around Tacoma. So I was like, okay, wow, that's interesting that these enclaves are gendered in many respects.
This is something that we were talking about when we were prepping for today, which is that when we are thinking about gay men being involved in preservation in small towns, and I don't mean to be like ultra typical, but I'm just going to do it, right? Like the gay couple moving into the small town, getting involved with their house. I feel like the welcoming, if it happens, would be largely from those women, perhaps older women, and being in a very female-centric sphere where, and again, I don't know if this is related to the fact that it's the home sphere, and maybe that's why it feels more female-oriented, at least historically. But then with gay men in cities, in gay enclaves, those tend to be very, as you said, heavily male-leaning and just adult men, right? And kind of nobody else. I don't know whether those two kind of stereotypes were true. I think they were true. Whether they're still true and whether they're going to continue to be true into the future, I have no idea. I would hope that we can now integrate spaces better, but who knows? I don't know. Free, what do you think?
I think that as we think about sort of the slow disappearances of like gay bars, lesbian bars, as we're seeing these places disappear because people are doing their interactions more online. You know, you're able to live wherever you live, wherever you want to live, and you still have access via apps to connect with people if you so choose. You don't have to go to a LGBT exclusive place if you have found community in, you know, some other community, which is why you're just seeing a number of those spaces. People are trying to landmark them
Yeah.
because they're disappearing, they're changing, they're becoming, bars can be transient, so they can change and be whatever it is they're going to be, but it's still important to capture the historic moments of those LGBTQ spaces, I think. But yeah, with the rise of those apps and things like that, you don't need to go out to a bar to catch, to meet up with somebody. The old function isn't the same. Hell, I don't even think they're cruising places, places where people, would cruise and whatnot. That's changed again because why are you going to go outside when you can open your phone and find everybody that you think you might want, or folks who don't want you and you still want them, all those things. The digitization of our socialization has had, I think, an actual detrimental impact on certain LGBTQ historic places.
Right now, a lot of our lives are online, and
Yes.
I think a lot of us feel that loss of the in real life kind of analog
Right.
feelings. And I think it has encouraged people to, work more with their hands, to do more physically and on the physical environment. And the internet here, I think, is a boon because it allows people to connect even if they live in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah,
right? So that
that's
they
true.
can, look at YouTube and be like, how do I fix my shutters? How do I, spray
Right.
paint? How do I reglaze my windows? Whatever the case may be. And so I think it has given more DIYers basically more agency to do the work on their houses. As we established, I think a lot of LGBTQ folks, especially gay men, historically have really been the custodians of these historic buildings, right? Have really like preserved their property for, future generations. And I'm hoping that that's going to continue and perhaps even flourish.
Yeah, I don't want to come across as a, some sort of, oh, the classic historian doesn't like technology, Luddite, blah, 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 all of that. No, not at all. I agree. Absolutely. The aspects of our digital lives that are genuinely helpful is exactly what you talked about. People being able to simply go to YouTube to learn how to do things, finding out who in your community may be doing some preservation related work, that you can then hire them or learn from them one way or another. What I was speaking specifically to was just sort of by virtue of not having to socialize if you don't want to in real life, you can you can actually stay online
Yeah.
and not have to engage people in a social sense if you don't want to. But for things that you need, that are practical things, yeah, the internet is wonderful. It allows you it opens you up to people who provide services. And again, if you are a do-it-yourselfer, it certainly gives you opportunities to look at people at least attempt to do things on their own. If you haven't become fully invested in every HGTV show that exists out there, and somehow you pray that from the jump cuts that they do, that you may learn something.
Don't even get me started about HGTV and sledgehammers. Oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, don't, hey, listeners, please do not, HGTV is only fun for hate watching. Do not do what HGTV does. If you want to learn how to do preservation properly, YouTube can help you. PBS
Yeah.
is a very, very good
Right,
resource. HGTV, not so much.
Ugh.
But if you do have a lottery dream, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm one of those people. I would love to I will check out a lottery dream house in a minute.
Fair enough.
Just to see, like, oh, I'm happy for them. There's no jealousy at all. I'm like, oh, I am so proud of you all. Congratulations. I hope that vacation home that you found in whatever part of New Hampshire or Maine or Georgia or wherever it is you're going, I'm all for it. Congratulations, kings, queens, boo. You've done it.
Well, if I ever win the lottery, I want an Ewok village. So I'm just putting that out there to the universe. And a geodesic dome.
Yeah, see, I'm between a geodesic dome and an A-frame, so
Oh, an A-frame. I want that too.
You know what? I'm more than likely going to be moving into some beautifully Williamsburgish colonial type, near water. That's going to be me.
Yeah. That's your dream.
Great.
All right.
I'm that guy, and I'd also look for a pied-à-terre in somebody's city, not in the United States.
Yeah. So yes, if I had my A-frame, it has to be in the mountains, of course. So I would also have a pied-à-terre in some, East Coast city. I mean, right, we're dreaming.
Come hang out in Paris with me free sometime.
I'd love to. I've never been. The closest I've done Germany, and I did my toddler moments at Heathrow, and lots of Caribbean islands. So there we go.
That's nice too.
That's not my bit. I'm more of a Scotland, Iceland. I like it cool. I want my perpetual autumn. Someplace if I can find it. One of the things I would definitely want to land on with regard to sort of LGBTQ preservation issues and advocating for that is I always like to try to convey to people who are doing things now to try to develop, if they like, a preservation ethic for their future plans. I need more people within the broader LGBTQ realm who are doing things. Yes, I'm looking at you, RuPaul, to identify for us those places that you feel are historically relevant to your story, so that when that inevitable time comes, preservationists know what to do in terms of landmark processing, making sure that we get the right space so we don't have somebody coming, child, they never lived there. That is not the right place. If you give us that hand, we have a better opportunity to make sure that your preservation legacy is upheld. So an example that I like that I have given in that theme study was there's the author Elin Harris, who wrote this wonderful series of books that really took, Black folks by storm, dealt with gay issues, bi issues, bi dudes, marrying women who shouldn't be married to women because they had a male lover. He died unexpectedly. I believe he was 50 when he passed in the early 2000s. My question has always been, I don't know where he lived. I don't know where he wrote. I want to know, what are those things, and the people who know him, what can you tell me? Because I believe he was the first out African-American author to reach #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. That's a huge accomplishment, especially for somebody who started selling his books out of the trunk of his car and whatnot. And it was this underground movement with his literature, that sort of moved into the broader publishing realm. But I don't know the place that if I wanted to begin the process of getting his home designated, whether locally, at the state level, or nationally, I don't know where to begin. I don't know where that would be. Again, that's why I brought up, sort of the RuPauls out there. I'm looking at all the landscape of I'm specifically naming African-American LGBTQ folks. Help us, everybody who's out there who is doing something of note, you know who you are. Help us if you're interested in having that preservation ethic and feeding it. Help us who work in the field to be able to help honor your legacy, because that it will go a long way. It saves a lot of work, and it lessens the possibility of picking the wrong place. So that's one of those quiet pleas I often have. Military historic sites. I need to know those, I want to know those things. Sports figures, venues. I want to know those things. Music, places, artists. Help me and my fellow travelers get a better sense of what it is that best represents who you believe you are to be and where your history has been made. And, leave it to the professionals to help get that done. I think that's easy peasy doing, but we need that help from those folks who know that information.
Well, thank you. That's a fabulous note to end on, I think.
Thank you so much, Free, and thank you, Rae.
Yes, thank you, Andi. This was a great conversation. And happy
Thank you
Pride
so
Month,
much.
everyone.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.